My girlfriend left me when I lost my job and humiliated me. But now I found someone better, and she comes back filled with regret. I was born in a very humble home in the state of Ohio, in the United States. My father, William, was a mechanic in a small workshop, and my mother, Susan, cleaned houses to help with the expenses. We never lacked a plate on the table, but there were days when we reached the limit of our possibilities. Since I was a child, I witnessed how my parents worked hard day after day, enduring long work days and endless worries, just so that I would not lack the minimum. I remember that even when things were bad and we had to ration food during the week, they tried to keep a smile on their faces so that I would not feel guilty or worried. Even so, I grew up with the certainty that I needed to do something extraordinary to change the family situation. It was that desire that, from a very young age, drove me to seek any opportunity to save or earn extra money. When I turned 10, my father explained to me that the luxuries of life, like exotic vacations or houses with large gardens, were not for people like us, at least not at that moment. His intention was not to discourage me, but to prepare my mind to understand that any real economic achievement required discipline and hard work. He could not give me big gifts on my birthday, but he always found a way to give me a useful detail, like a book or some object that would motivate me to keep learning. My mother, for her part, repeated to me that the key to getting ahead was education and urged me to work hard in school to get scholarships and thus aspire to a different life. Her idea was that while we did not have a large bank account, I could develop my intellect and skills to succeed later on. During my school years, I was a very diligent student. At first, I felt enormous shame for wearing second-hand clothes or for not being able to afford the same school supplies as my classmates. Over time, however, I understood that this situation made me stronger and invited me to seek ingenious solutions. I took advantage of every book that was lent to me, spent hours in the public library, and entered any academic contest that offered a prize, no matter how modest. This desire for self-improvement allowed me to gain a certain reputation among my teachers, who noticed my determination. Seeing my dedication, many of them offered to help me, giving me extra tutoring, or even taking me to science fairs and math olympiads. By the time I reached adolescence, my parents could barely cover the basic expenses, so at 15 I decided it was time to look for a part-time job. I started by cleaning windows at a nearby gas station, and then moved on to delivering newspapers at dawn. It was an exhausting time, because I had to get up before dawn to deliver the newspapers and, after school, dedicate a few hours to my other job. Even so, my efforts paid off. At 17, I had a small savings that I used to buy a used computer. That device, which for many would be something trivial, became my window to the world. Thanks to the internet and various online study programs, I was able to strengthen my skills in mathematics, programming, and writing academic essays, areas that I considered vital for my future. In my senior year of high school, my grade point average was one of the highest. That opened the doors to several scholarships. I remember the day I received the acceptance letter from a prestigious university in Massachusetts with an almost full scholarship. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. I realized that all the sacrifice had been worth it. My parents cried with emotion, and, although they knew they could not afford the part not covered by the scholarship, they encouraged me to look for part-time jobs on campus to supplement the expenses. I was determined. I did not care if I had to work on weekends or on vacation, as long as I could get an education at a renowned institution and thus, over time, help them in the same way they had helped me throughout my life. At that prestigious university, my world turned completely upside down. The campus was immense, full of buildings with imposing architecture, modern laboratories, and study spaces that were open 24 hours. In my first semester, I felt intimidated by the presence of children from wealthy families, accustomed to a standard of living that was foreign to me. However, I soon discovered that my discipline and my ability to solve academic problems allowed me to meet any challenge. It was in an advanced literature class where I met Jennifer, the girl who would later become my girlfriend. She came from a wealthy family in Connecticut, and what most caught my attention was that despite her evident experience with luxuries and comforts, she showed a genuine interest in the people around her. It did not take us long to become friends, sharing chats about books, music, and our professional aspirations. Over time, our friendship transformed into something more intimate. We spent entire afternoons studying in the library, laughing about anecdotes of university life, and telling each other secrets from our childhood. Jennifer used to tell me that she admired my perseverance and the way I overcame economic difficulties. I was fascinated by her self-confidence and the serenity with which she approached challenges. When we became a couple, I felt that I had finally found someone who understood me and appreciated my efforts. What I did not anticipate was that her lifestyle, full of luxuries, parties, and spontaneous trips with friends, could eventually clash with my need to save every penny. But at that moment, everything seemed to flow smoothly, and I was too excited about the idea of a bright future to question those differences. My plan was to graduate with the best possible grades to compete for the recruitment programs offered by major corporations. Jennifer also had her aspirations. She wanted to work in the world of public relations, and, thanks to her family's contacts, she would have no problem achieving it. When I was about to finish my penultimate semester, I received the news that one of my professors, Professor Anderson, was recommending me for an internship at a major technology company. I was so excited that I felt my heart was going to explode. That experience would not only allow me to cover my last university expenses, but it could also open the doors to a permanent job after graduation. Things moved at a dizzying pace. I graduated with honors. My parents traveled to accompany me to the ceremony, and Jennifer was by my side, proud. After graduation, I was confirmed at the company where I had done my internship, with a salary that exceeded all my expectations. I received congratulatory calls from family and friends, and even people I had not spoken to since high school reappeared to congratulate me, and, by the way, to see if it was true that I was now earning as much money as the rumors said. I lived through a period of euphoria. I moved to a more comfortable apartment, with a high rent, but which I considered manageable with my new salary. Jennifer and I were not officially roommates, but she spent so much time at my apartment that we had our shared routines, cooking together, although we frequently ordered takeout from expensive restaurants, choosing modern furniture that fit our style, and buying designer clothes, taking advantage of the constant sales in the city. At first, everything went smoothly in my new job. My superiors were impressed with my analytical skills and assigned me tasks of increasing relevance. I began to gain a reputation for my ability to identify calculation errors and for my willingness to stay extra hours, making sure every detail was perfect. I felt an immense responsibility because this job was the key to my professional growth and my family's well-being. However, I did not realize the trap of getting used so quickly to spending money on things I previously considered non-essential. Jennifer, for her part, saw nothing wrong with that lifestyle. She was used to it since she was a child, so she took it for granted that I could sustain it, especially when my salary was considerably good for my age. A year and a half passed when my boss, Mr. Parker, called me to his office to give me news that at the time seemed like a blessing. They wanted to put me in charge of a very important project for the company, one that included the expansion of certain computer systems internationally. Parker considered that my training in programming and my ability to coordinate teams made me the perfect candidate. I felt honored and at the same time scared. It was the biggest challenge of my career up to that point. Even so, I accepted without hesitation. I wanted to prove my worth, to stand out even more, to earn a better position. I was excited by the idea of putting my name on a project of that magnitude. However, not everything was so wonderful. I soon discovered that that project was a monster of enormous complexity. I had to coordinate several teams in different locations in the country and also collaborate with external personnel in other countries who barely spoke rudimentary English. The flow of information was confusing, the delivery dates were unrealistic, and my boss demanded quick results without considering that I was relatively new to managing such large projects. I began to suffer from overwhelming pressure. I barely slept, and when I was at home with Jennifer, I felt so stressed that I could hardly hold a normal conversation with her. Still, I invested all my energy in carrying out that assignment. I thought that if I managed to complete it successfully, my future in the company would be brilliant. The weeks turned into months of physical and mental exhaustion. In the end, the project did not progress at the expected pace. There were planning errors, technical failures that no one foresaw, and an evident lack of coordination that was partly my responsibility. It was hard for me to accept that the situation was going down the drain, but the figures were conclusive. The project was over the initial budget, and, to make matters worse, serious incidents had been detected in the system's infrastructure. My boss, who at first encouraged me by saying that I would be the star of the company, gradually transformed into a biting critic who did not hesitate to reprimand me in every meeting. His scoldings were harsh and often in public, which further undermined my confidence. One afternoon, after a particularly tense meeting, I was called to human resources. I feared it was to relocate me or, in the worst case, to give me an ultimatum. It was even more serious. They informed me that the company had decided to terminate my services. They tried to justify it by saying that the project had been a shared risk, but that my inexperience had contributed to the failure and now the company could not afford to continue with an employee who did not meet expectations. I felt like my world was collapsing. I went from being the company's young promise to being responsible for the biggest fiasco of the year. They gave me a smaller severance than I thought I was entitled to, claiming that my contract was not as stable as I had supposed. I left the offices dazed, trembling, with a lost look in my eyes. I could only think about what I would tell Jennifer and my parents. I had already gotten used to a certain lifestyle, I had made considerable purchases, and I had credit card debts that I had used to finance some luxuries. When I got home, Jennifer noticed my expression of anguish. I told her, with a trembling voice, that I had lost my job. Her response, at first, was one of disbelief. She hugged me and told me that we should think about options, that I could surely relocate to another company or even, with the help of her family's contacts, find a new position. I clung to that hopeful idea and calmed down a bit, telling myself that everything would have a solution. However, as the days passed, it became increasingly clear that my situation would not be resolved so quickly. I started sending resumes to dozens of companies, consulting firms, and agencies. I called former colleagues, acquaintances, anyone who could give me a contact or an interview. Instead of using the savings I theoretically should have had, I realized that I had spent most of it on debts and a lifestyle I could not sustain without a fixed income. And, unfortunately, the job responses were not coming. To make matters worse, the few interviews I had ended with comments like, "You are overqualified for this position," or "We need someone with more experience in crisis management." It was desperate, as if my academic achievements and my experience in that huge failed project had become an obstacle instead of an advantage. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice changes in the behavior of the people around me. My university classmates, who used to invite me out and congratulate me on my achievements, began to distance themselves. I no longer received those friendly messages to have a coffee or attend some party. It seemed that by losing my job, I also lost the appeal that had made me a kind of benchmark for success. It was hard and lonely. Jennifer, although she initially maintained an encouraging attitude, began to show herself to be increasingly impatient. She would make hurtful comments to me like, "Did you call so-and-so yet?" Or, "How can you not find something if you are so smart?" with a tone of growing exasperation. I felt my self-esteem plummet more with each small reproach. Things got more complicated when the lack of income forced me to sell some of the more expensive items I owned. I got rid of my huge screen television. I even sold the car I had bought with a bank loan. I needed to get rid of debts and, with what little I had left, survive while I found a new job. Jennifer began to treat me with disdain, as if my worth depended on my ability to afford weekend trips or luxurious dinners. I remember a particularly painful argument in which she told me, "How do you expect me to live without the comforts I am used to? Really, do you not have the sagacity to at least keep us afloat?" Her tone was icy, and her words echoed in my head. Remember, for more stories like this, subscribe, give it a like, and activate the bell. Let us continue. The tension reached a critical point when she, fed up with my uselessness, as she called it, told me she was going to move back in with her family until I got back on track. I had no strength to hold her back. I was emotionally destroyed. I felt guilty for having disappointed her, although at the same time, I sensed that she did not value my effort or understand my circumstances. A couple of weeks later, Jennifer returned to the apartment to collect all her things and, in a fit of rage, told me that I was a very pathetic failure and that I would never amount to anything. She added that I could never fit into her world of luxuries and important contacts. It was as if a knife had been plunged into my chest. She left without looking back, and I stayed there, in a place that had almost no furniture left, with a lump in my throat and a feeling of emptiness that I had never experienced before. The following months were terrible. I isolated myself almost completely. I barely left the apartment, except to submit job applications or attend interviews that always ended with a "we will call you" that never materialized. Anxiety and depression absorbed me. There were days when I did not even have the strength to get out of bed. I constantly thought that maybe she was right to consider me a failure. What was the use of so many years of study, so many scholarships won, so many sleepless nights, if in the end I found myself in a more precarious position than ever? However, at the lowest point of my spirits, my parents appeared, ready to lend me a hand as always. Even though they did not have much money, they did everything possible to help me cover some urgent payments. Their savings were scarce, and I was reluctant to use their money, but they insisted it was an act of love. My father traveled from Ohio to see how he could support me, and my mother sent me canned food and food containers with homemade food so that I would not eat so poorly. It was then that I understood the true value of family, of those deep bonds that do not break even in the worst circumstances. At the same time, my childhood best friend, Mark, who had never shown a special interest in my financial status, offered me a little money he had saved from his job as a nurse. He told me not to worry about paying him back soon, that the important thing was for me to get back on my feet. That genuine gesture moved me deeply. It made me realize that there were people who loved me for who I was and not for my economic position. Despite all that support, the job search continued to be a roller coaster of rejections. They told me my skills were too specialized and that they were looking for someone with a different profile. I even considered whether I should remove my training from my resume so they would not see me as an excess of talent that was difficult to pay for. One day, while I was trying to get a few dollars by selling some belongings at a secondhand store, I ran into Professor Anderson, the same professor who had recommended me for the internship at the big company where I worked. At first, I felt embarrassed because I did not want him to see me in such a precarious situation, but he approached with a big smile and greeted me affectionately. He invited me for a coffee at the corner cafe, and I, with a bit of shame, accepted. We sat at a small table and I told him, almost in tears, everything that had happened in the last few months, my dismissal, the betrayal of the people I thought were close, Jennifer's abandonment, the debts, and the impossibility of finding a new job. Professor Anderson listened to me attentively, without judging, and then shared his own personal story with me. He confessed that he had also gone through a similar stage when he was young. He achieved a rapid promotion in a multinational company, lived for a couple of years with comforts, traveled through Europe, and suddenly, a calculation error in a crucial project cost him his job. He told how he lost several of his friends, and how his partner at the time distanced herself from him, arguing that she could not be with someone so unstable. When he hit rock bottom, he discovered who the people were who truly loved him, and thanks to that crisis, he ended up reevaluating his life and finding the strength to move forward. Over time, he got an even better position and ended up as a university professor, inspiring students like me. I was impressed. I never imagined that Professor Anderson, a man I always saw as so erudite and stable, had gone through something so similar to what I was going through. And his words gave me back a spark of hope. He told me not to underestimate my abilities, that I should try again without letting myself be crushed by a setback. He invited me to come to his office the following Monday at the company where he now collaborated as an external consultant. He did not give me many details, only mentioned that there might be an interesting project for me. He made it clear that I should not get my hopes up too high, but that if he had learned anything in his years of experience, it was that talent is not lost through failure, rather it is strengthened. When we said goodbye, I felt, for the first time in a long time, a little light at the end of the tunnel. That Monday, I showed up at the office Professor Anderson had indicated. It was a tall, modern building with windows covering the entire facade. There was a corporate atmosphere similar to my old company, but with a more creative touch. I announced myself at the reception and, a few minutes later, the professor received me and took me to a boardroom. There, to my surprise, he introduced me to several people, including a project manager named Samuel, who was leading a new department focused on technological innovation for the city. Apparently, the local government was promoting initiatives to modernize certain processes, and they needed a team of professionals who combined technical knowledge and management skills. The professor spoke very highly of me, highlighting my discipline, my academic training, and even mentioning that my experience in a large project, although it had not ended successfully, gave me the necessary perspective to anticipate problems and handle them with more caution. Samuel asked me a few questions to understand my work approach, and I answered with the best disposition. I felt enormous nervousness, but at the same time, I noticed that, unlike other interviews, here they were more interested in knowing how I handled adversity than in judging me for the previous failure. After a couple of hours, Samuel told me they needed someone with my profile to coordinate one of the initiative's star projects, the implementation of an online services network to streamline citizen procedures. Professor Anderson gave me a pat on the back and said he had full confidence in me. The first day at that new job was strange. I was afraid of making the same mistakes. I got anxious with every decision I made, fearing that everything would collapse again. However, Samuel and the professor encouraged me to believe in my abilities. In addition, my family and my best friend, Mark, were happy to see me getting back on my feet. I, for my part, felt the responsibility not to let them down. I worked cautiously, listening to all the team members, learning from past stumbles, and seeking constant communication so as not to make the same coordination mistakes. Sometimes I stayed late at the office, but I tried not to isolate myself or overload myself with tasks as before. I discovered the importance of delegating and asking for help when something was beyond my reach. As the months went by, the project began to take shape. We implemented the online services system in a test phase in several city districts, and the results were very positive. People could carry out procedures that used to take them hours or days in just a few clicks. The local press became interested and began to publish articles about the initiative. Samuel insisted that we celebrate every victory, no matter how small, as a team to maintain high motivation. I smiled shyly when he credited me with part of the success. It was the first time in a long time that I felt useful and valued again. As the project grew, so did my reputation in the company. Suddenly, my colleagues stopped seeing me as the rookie who had failed before and began to recognize my ability to handle complex situations. They approached me for advice, and I made an effort to guide them. It was a drastic change compared to the hostility or indifference I felt at the end of my previous job. The difference was that in this place, the corporate culture seemed to foster learning and collaboration instead of reproaches. Of course, there were tense moments, difficult goals, and demanding people, but I felt a more constructive atmosphere. Several months of intense work passed, and the day came when the project was officially presented to municipal authorities and business leaders of the region. The event was large, with cameras and reporters covering everything. I was on stage with Professor Anderson, Samuel, and other project leaders. When they gave me the floor to explain the social and economic impact of the system we had implemented, my hands trembled a little, but I swallowed my anxiety and spoke from my experience. I mentioned that the most important thing about this achievement was the team and the shared vision of improving people's lives. When I finished, I received applause and even some congratulations from influential people in the city. A few days later, Samuel called me to his office to inform me of some news. The company was planning to give me a higher position with a better salary and greater responsibility. They wanted me to supervise new projects that would arise from the success of the current one. He also told me, with a smile, that he had seen an article in the local news where I was highlighted as a young promise, mentioning my apparent triumphant return to the corporate world. I was speechless. It was exactly what I had never imagined would happen after losing everything in my previous job. I felt a mixture of pride and gratitude towards those who trusted me when I myself doubted my abilities. Along with this new promotion, I began to receive messages and calls from old acquaintances, including some university classmates who had ignored me in recent months. Suddenly, they remembered to invite me to gatherings. They told me they admired my perseverance and that they always knew I would go far. I also received a couple of calls from friends who had turned their backs on me and, surprisingly, a notification on my phone with a message from Jennifer. It said something like, "Hello, James. I have been thinking a lot about you. I wanted to congratulate you on your achievements. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my heart tight with a mixture of rage and pain. I remembered all the hurtful words she threw at me when I was down. My first impulse was to ignore her, but curiosity got the better of me. I left the message on read, without responding immediately. Instead of letting myself be carried away by anger, I chose to focus on continuing to work and, above all, on my family and my friend Mark, who had been with me at the most critical moment. Now that I had more stable income, I decided to help my parents in a more substantial way. I promised them I would buy them a modest house in a quiet neighborhood so they could grow old without worries. My father resisted, saying he did not want me to spend my money, but I explained that I was doing it gladly, as a way of thanking them for the sacrifices they made for me when I had nothing. My mother cried with emotion when I signed the first papers and showed her the property I had found. Likewise, I decided to support a project that Mark had had in mind for years. He wanted to start a small medical supply business, something that would combine his knowledge in nursing with the needs of local clinics and hospitals. He proposed the idea to me, and I was enthusiastic. I thought it would be a great opportunity to diversify my income and at the same time help a loyal friend. I invested part of my savings and advised him on financial planning, using what I had learned in university and in my jobs. Seeing the excitement on his face as we moved forward with the first steps gave me a satisfaction that not even the highest salary could give me. While my life was getting back on a prosperous and balanced track, I continued to receive insistent messages from Jennifer. Sometimes they were long, with a tone between repentant and nostalgic, and other times they were brief, asking me not to forget her. She told me it was a mistake to leave me, that she had been pressured by her family, and that deep down she had always loved me. I confess that each of those messages produced a mixture of anger and sadness in me. I remembered how she humiliated me, how she called me pathetic, how she never cared about my well-being beyond the money I could generate. But at the same time, the good moments we once shared were stirred up. As the days passed, I understood that it was pointless to hate her. Resentment only tied me to a painful past. A month after I was promoted, an encounter that I had not foreseen happened. I went to a coffee shop I used to frequent with Jennifer during our university days. I liked the tranquility of the place and the aroma of cinnamon that filled the air. Just as I was ordering a coffee and checking my phone, I heard a voice behind me. It was her, standing there, looking at me with teary eyes. She told me she had passed by hoping to find me. At first, I wanted to run away, but I chose to sit at a table and let her speak, at least to close that chapter once and for all. Jennifer began with a torrent of apologies. She told me that after leaving my apartment, she had reflected on how she let herself be carried away by appearances and by her fear of losing the lifestyle she had had since she was a child. She admitted that she had been with other people out of inertia, but that she never felt for them what she felt for me. She told me that she regretted every hurtful word she had said to me, that she felt guilty for having abandoned me when I most needed support, and that now, seeing me reborn and succeed in an even greater field, she realized that I was the love of her life. Crying, she begged me to give her another chance, that we could resume our goals, maybe get married and start a family. She even mentioned that her parents were willing to improve our relationship and help me with whatever was necessary. I remained silent for a few seconds, breathing deeply so as not to get carried away by an outburst. I observed her face and could see a certain level of desperation. Maybe she had realized that she was no longer young enough to keep looking for another wealthy partner, or maybe she truly felt remorse. I do not know, but what I was clear about was that the person who had hurt me in the cruelest way was no longer part of my future. I took a sip of coffee and, with the calmest voice I could muster, I told her that our relationship had ended the moment she treated me like trash for losing my job. I reminded her that a true relationship is tested in storms, not on sunny days. If she truly loved me, she would not have thrown my dignity to the ground when I was going through a bad time. She cried more and begged me to understand her, that she was confused. I wanted to feel pity, but above all, I felt the need to be firm. I told her that thanks to her abandonment, I had discovered who the people were that were really there for me, regardless of my economic situation. I told her how my parents, with hardly any resources, came to my aid and how my friend Mark offered me the little he had without asking for anything in return. I explained that in those dark months, I understood that true wealth was not in the bank account, but in the loyalty and affection of those who do not let you fall. And I concluded by telling her that as far as I was concerned, she was part of a past from which I would only keep the lessons, not her empty promises. Jennifer, soaked in tears, asked me again and again not to be so cruel, to consider giving her a chance. But I was not being cruel. I simply knew that I could never again trust someone who trampled on me when I most needed a hand. I told her that I wished she would find happiness and peace in her future, but it would not be with me. I stood up, paid for the coffees, and said goodbye to her. As I left, I felt a relief that coursed through my body, as if I had suddenly let go of all the resentment and pain that had accompanied me for months. Yes, it was sad to close that door for good, but it was also liberating to realize that my life had changed for the better and that I was a different man, someone who no longer defined his own worth solely based on a job or a relationship. From that encounter, I dedicated myself to consolidating my career and, above all, my own well-being. I focused on living more modestly, without getting carried away by the consumerist impulses that once blinded me. I started to save for real and to invest cautiously, trying to avoid the arrogance of thinking that success lasts forever. I also became more aware of the value of my personal bonds. Whenever I had the chance, I invited my parents to spend a few days at my new home. I continuously followed up on Mark's business, making sure his accounts balanced and that he felt supported. In a short time, his venture began to be profitable, and I felt more proud of his success than of any of my own personal achievements. Today, I look back and understand that all those adversities I experienced were a kind of trial by fire. Losing my job, the contempt of people I considered friends, the painful breakup with Jennifer, all of that taught me that a person's value is not measured exclusively by their bank account or their job title. On the contrary, I discovered that true strength lies in perseverance, in humility, and in the ability to get up after falling. It was not an easy path. There were nights when I seriously thought I had nothing to offer the world. But life showed me that every failure can be the prelude to a greater triumph, as long as we do not give up. My parents, who now live in the house I was able to buy for them, continue to be an important pillar in my life. My father, proud though not very expressive, tells me from time to time that I must keep my feet on the ground, that I should remember my humble origins. My mother, with her unwavering faith, thanks whoever she considers responsible for her son being well. Mark and I are planning to expand his business to other areas of the country, and as for Professor Anderson, he continues to be my mentor and friend. We meet from time to time to discuss ideas and exchange perspectives. I owe a large part of my professional resurgence to him. And, more than anything, I thank him for believing in me when I did not even believe in myself. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had kept my first job without any setbacks. Perhaps I would still be living a life focused on superficial luxury, surrounded by friendships based on interest, and with a partner who valued me for my wallet, not for my essence. Today I understand that hitting rock bottom was the shake-up I needed to rethink my priorities and, above all, to understand that loyalty and genuine love cannot be bought. I feel fulfilled and, most importantly, at peace with myself. I do not know what the future holds for me, but now I face challenges with the confidence that whatever the outcome, I will be able to learn and move forward. The people who once ignored me or treated me with contempt now seek me out. On social media, I receive friend requests and messages of, "I am so happy for your success." And although I am not resentful, I simply choose not to mix again with those who showed their true colors in my worst moment. It is not a matter of revenge, but of emotional intelligence. I have learned that it is better to surround yourself with a few genuine people than with an interested crowd. I know that my parents, Mark, and some sincere friendships I have made in my new company form my true community, and that intimate circle is enough for me.